I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, Bill Gates on AI, the path to superintelligence, and what it means for all of us. I suspect that every moment in human history has felt pivotal, precarious, as if anything could happen. Certainly in the last few hundred years. But it also must be true that some moments are more pivotal than others. This is one of those moments. We've seen the impact of transformative technological change. The internet has sped the world up, and social media, now on most every phone in most every hand, has polarized our communities, hyperbolized our politics, and now we are in the early moments of the AI revolution. What will the next decade bring? There are few people I would rather ask this question than Microsoft co-founder and global philanthropist Bill Gates. Bill's been at the forefront of the race to build machines that can empower humans for 50 years, ever since he declared his mission to put a computer on every desk in every home. He was instrumental in driving the development of personal computing in the 80s, the growth of the internet in the 90s, and more recently, leading the charge to eradicate malaria and other diseases. In the last few years, he's been on the front lines of Microsoft's partnership with OpenAI and the development of GPT. How is it, you may be wondering, that Bill Gates has ended up joining us today? Well, for the last few months, I've been reading a book that's being published serially by Harvard Business Review. It's called AI First, and it features interviews with folks like Reid Hoffman, Mustafa Suleyman, Sam Altman, and Bill, who collectively make the case that AI isn't overhyped, it's underhyped. We thought it would be interesting to not just interview the co-authors of this book, career technologist Andy Sack, an old friend of mine, and former Starbucks chief digital officer Adam Brotman, and they suggested inviting one of their most interesting interviewees, Bill Gates. And so what's Bill's take on the AI revolution? Superintelligence is coming. There's no clear way to slow it down. And the technology available today is already a game changer. This is largely a good thing. We can harness AI to solve our biggest global problems. We are likely to live in decades to come in a world of superabundance, but it will take vigilance to make sure it's the world we want for ourselves and generations to come. Bill Gates, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you.
Bill, Andy and Adam and I were just talking about the digital transformations we've seen in our own lives in the last 40 years. And you haven't just seen these transformations, you've played an instrumental role in moving them forward. You've said that the demo you saw last September of GPT-4 was mind-blowing. Was it more mind-blowing than the first demo of the graphical user interface that you saw at Xerox PARC in 1980?
I'd say yes. I mean, I'd seen graphical interface prior to the Xerox PARC stuff, and that, was an embodiment that helped motivate a lot of what Apple and Microsoft did with personal computing in the decade after that. People kind of take it for granted today that we have those interfaces, but compared to unlocking a new type of intelligence that can read and write, graphics interface is clearly less impactful, which is saying a lot.
Well, I was interested to learn that AI is not a new interest of yours. You were intrigued as a student way back in the 70s, and I gather you wrote, I think, a letter to your parents and said effectively, Mom, Dad, I may miss out on the AI revolution if I start this company, which is the company that became Microsoft. The AI revolution took a little longer than maybe you might have guessed back then. Now it's happening. What interested you about AI in those early days, and is it becoming what you'd imagined back then?
Well, certainly anybody who writes software is thinking about what human cognition is able to achieve and, making that comparison. And when I was in high school, there were things like Shaky the Robot at Stanford Research Institute, which should engage in reasoning and come up with an execution plan and move, figure out to move the ramp and go up the ramp and grab the blocks. And, it felt like some of these key capabilities, whether it was speech recognition, image recognition, would be fairly solvable. There were a lot of attempts and so-called rule-based systems and things that just didn't capture the richness. And so, our respect for human cognition, constantly goes up as we try to
Yeah.
match pieces of it. But we saw with machine learning techniques, we could match uh, vision and speech recognition, so that's powerful. But the holy grail that even after those advances, I kept highlighting was the ability to read and represent knowledge like humans did was just, nothing was good at all. Uh, then language translation came down, but still
Mhm.
that was a very special case thing. But GPT-4 in a very deep way, far beyond GPT-3, showed that we could access and represent knowledge. And it's, the fluency in many respects, although not the accuracy, is already superhuman.
Yeah, it's just astounding. And we never would have guessed that moving the chess pieces on the chessboard would be harder than becoming a better chess player than Kasparov. but it's interesting to see how what the challenges turn out to be. Um, and as you said, that Xerox PARC demo set the agenda for Microsoft for maybe the next 15 years, right? The development of Windows and Office and do you think that the impact of what's happening right now in AI is going to set the agenda for the next many decades and even more so?
It's absolutely the most important thing going on, and it'll shape humanity in a very dramatic way. It's at the same time that we have, synthetic biology and robotics, being controlled by the AIs, so we have to keep in mind those other things. But the dominant change agent will be AI.
In 1980, you had a light bulb moment when you famously declared, "There will be a computer in every home, on every desk." What do you think the equivalent is for AI? Do you think we'll have an AI advisor in every ear?
Well, the hardware form factor doesn't matter that much, but the idea of the earbud that's both adding audio and canceling out audio and enhancing audio clearly will be a very primary form factor, just like glasses that can project sort of arbitrary video into your visual field will be, sort of the embodiment of how you're interacting. But the personal agent, that I've been writing about for decades,
Mm.
that's, superior to a human assistant in that it's tracking and reading all the things that you wanted to read, um, and, just there to help you and understands the context enough that, you know, silly things like you don't trust software today to even order your email messages. It's in a, stupid, dumb, time ordered form because the contextual understanding of, okay, what am I about to do next? What's the nature of the task that these messages relate to? You don't trust software to combine all of the, new information and including uh, new communications. You go to your mail and that's time ordered. You go to your
Yeah.
text and that's time ordered. You go to your social network and that's time ordered. I mean, computers are operating at a almost trivial level of semantics in terms of understanding what's your intent when you sit down with the machine or helping you with your activities. And now that they can essentially read like a white collar worker, uh, that interface will be entirely agent driven, agent executive assistant, agent mental therapy, agent friend, agent girlfriend, agent expert, all driven by deep AI.
And it seems like it will be useful in proportion to how much it knows about us. And I imagine at some point in the not too distant future, probably all four of us will be asked if we want to turn on audio so our AI assistant can effectively like listen to our whole life, right? And I would think that there'll be benefits to do that because we'll get good counsel, good advice. Do you think that's true? And do you think will you turn it on when invited to turn on the audio?
Well, computers today see every email message that I write. And certainly digital channels are seeing, all my online meetings and phone calls. So you're already disclosing into digital systems a lot about yourself. And so, yes, the value added of the agent in terms of summarize that meeting or help me with those follow-ups, be phenomenal. And the agent will have different modes in terms of which of your information it's able to operate with. So there will be partitions that you have, but for your essentially executive assistant agent, you won't exclude much at all from that partition.
Rufus, before we
Yeah,
go further down the
yeah.
agent pathway, one question that I've been thinking about since our interview with you, Bill, for AI First, um, in which you talked about really comparing your experience at Xerox PARC versus your experiencing ChatGPT 4. Sort of, I think you're in the most unique position. There are probably a couple of other people that I could think of, but you're in the most unique position to have the set of understanding of computer technology as well as building business and how computers affect human beings. I'm curious if what you said in this conversation, which was ChatGPT was as big, it sounded like you even said it was bigger than your Xerox Park moment. What does that make you think about when you think about your grandchild's life, and what advice do you have for the sort of the next generation of leaders for tackling the challenges that are unique to AI? Um, Sort of curious about that perspective.
There's certainly novel problems uh, in that other technologies develop slower, and the upper bound of their capabilities is pretty identifiable. I mean, yes, mechanization made farming more efficient, and so people worried about, okay, where's the labor demand come? And over time, that question was answered very succinctly, even though at the time, there were generations that never had to experience that or adjust to it. So this technology is, in terms of its capability, is, will reach even modulo reliability will reach superhuman levels. We're not there today if you put in the reliability constraint. A lot of the new work is adding a level of metacognition that, done properly, will solve the sort of erratic nature of the genius that is easily available today in the white collar realm, and over time in the blue collar realm as well. So yes, this is a huge milestone that uh, some of those past things are helpful too, but um, it's novel enough that nobody's faced the policy issues, which are mostly of a very positive nature in terms of uh, white collar labor productivity.
What's the thing that excites you the most about the invention?
Well, all these shortages, there's no organization that faces white collar shortage as much as the Gates Foundation, where we look at health in uh, sub-Saharan Africa or other developing countries, or lack of teachers who can engage you in a deep way, ideally in your native language. And so the idea that modulo whatever the server cost is, that by using the mobile phone infrastructure that continues to drive pretty significant penetration even in very poor countries, the idea that medical advice and personal tutors can be delivered where because it's meeting you in your language and your semantics, there isn't like some big training thing that's taking place there. You just pick up your phone and listen, to what it's saying. So, it's very exciting to take the tragic lack of resources that particularly people in developing countries have to deal with.
And you've been working for 20 years on the Gates Foundation and really tackling these issues of global healthcare, education, climate change. Do you think that, I mean, we were just speaking to education and healthcare. Do you think that AI will be an accelerant that will make it possible to accomplish in 5 or 10 years what it took the last 20 years to accomplish? Or how meaningful do you think the acceleration is likely to be in these areas?
Well, the very tough problems of some, diseases that we don't have great tools for, the AI will help a lot. The last 20 years, was pretty miraculous in that we cut child to death in half from 10 million a year to 5 million a year. That was largely by getting tools like certain vaccines to be cheaper and making sure they were getting to all the world's children. And so that was kind of low-hanging fruit. And now we have, tougher issues. But with the AIs, the upstream discovery part of, okay, why do kids get malnourished, or why has it been so hard to make an HIV vaccine? Yes, we can be way more optimistic about those huge breakthroughs. AI will help us with every aspect of these things: the advice, the delivery, the diagnosis. The scientific discovery piece is moving ahead at a pretty incredible clip, and the Gates Foundation's very, very involved in funding quite a bit of that.
Yeah, we had your friend Saul Khan on the show recently, and got the chance to spend a bunch of time with Conmigo, and I was just astonished by what that can do. I know you were recently in New Jersey, visiting schools that are implementing Khan Academy's new programs, and that's pretty exciting. This idea that improving education at scale for billions of people, the impact of that is pretty hard to measure.
Yeah, I mean, Saul's book is, doesn't say, okay, what world are we educating kids for? It's just, if all AI was available in education, that's pretty miraculous, because you have the other things shifting at the same time. It's, a little more confusing, but that realm where he
Right.
says, okay, what if it was just an education? It's incredibly positive.
Yeah, well, that gets to the personal part of your, I think you have a new granddaughter. I know Adam has a 7-year-old, and when we think of this question of like what does it look like? I mean, fantastic that our kids will have an Aristotle level private tutor to help further accelerate their educational process. But there is the question of like what will they need to know to be effective in the world. And my kids and Andy's kids are a little older, but I know, Adam, you've got a younger daughter, and
Yeah,
Bill, you've got a new granddaughter.
it's interesting because, Bill, I wanted to come at this from a slightly different direction, but since you brought it up, she she's able to really, she watches me use whisper mode on ChatGPT. She's seen me live in an AI world, and it's fascinating to watch her be very comfortable with a voice interface. Especially at her age, it's actually easier for her to do voice interface than, she's still learning how to spell. I mean, she just figured out how to read. So I thought that was an interesting, I'll call it, look into, how much of this can be not just natural language chat, but even voice chat versus point and click. But Bill, I was going to ask you something about the direction, maybe come at this from a slightly different direction, which is, what do you think about this debate? There's a little bit of a debate going on. Maybe that's too strong of a word, about whether or not the fact that all these frontier or foundation models have sort of clustered into benchmarks around ChatGPT 4. And there's some people that are on the side that, we're plateauing or something like that. And then but most of the smartest researchers I follow tend to still say with the fact that the scaling laws are going to continue to apply for at least the next couple of years. I'd love to get your take on where do you come out on that discussion, and B, do you find yourself rooting for it to plateau, or are you like emotionally agnostic because of some of the concerns around the technology?
Well, the big frontier is not so much scaling. We have, you know, probably two more turns of the crank on scaling, where by accessing video data and getting very good at synthetic data, that we can scale up probably, two more times. That's not the most interesting dimension. The most interesting dimension is what I call metacognition, where understanding how to think about a problem in a broad sense and step back and say, okay, how important is this answer? How could I check my answer? What external tools would help me with this? The overall cognitive strategy is so trivial today that, it's just generating through constant computation each token in sequence. And it's mind blowing that that works at all. It does not step back like a human and think, okay, I'm going to write this paper and here's what I want to cover. Okay, I'll put some facts in. Here's what I want to do for the summary. And so you see this limitation when you have a problem like various math things, like a Sudoku puzzle, where just generating that upper left-hand thing first, it causes it to be wrong on anything above a certain complexity. So we're going to get the scaling benefits, but at the same time, the various actions to change the underlying reasoning algorithm from the trivial that we have today to more human-like metacognition, that's the big frontier that it's a little hard to predict how quickly that'll happen. I've seen that we will make progress on that next year, but we won't completely solve it for some time after that. So your genius will get to be more predictable. Now, in certain domains, confined domains, we are getting to the point of being able to show extreme accuracy on some of the math or even some of the health type domains. But the open-ended thing will require general breakthroughs on metacognition.
And do you think that metacognition will involve building in a looping mechanism so the AI develops an ability to ruminate as we Homo sapiens do? And I've heard some people like Max Tegmark suggest that could be part of what makes us conscious, is this ability to have conversations with ourselves.
Yeah, consciousness may relate to metacognition. It's not a phenomena that is subject to measurement, so it's always tricky. And, clearly these digital things are unlikely to have any such equivalent. But it is the big frontier and it will be human-like in terms of knowing to work hard on certain hard problems and having a sense of confidence and ways of checking what you've done.
Yeah, Phil, I was going to just ask about the second part of Adam's question. Do you find yourself rooting, like, given this? I mean, one of the things that I'll just say in the process of writing and interviewing you for AI First, as well as Reid Hoffman and Sam Altman, Mustafa, it's been an education for it. It's been an education for Adam and I. And I come away from these conversations regularly going, "Oh my goodness." um, and and I'm blown away at the pace. Like, I'm paying attention every day to the pace of the technological advance by really many different companies, large companies. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of talent being poured into us, and so the pace of the development is, and the potential impact of that technological advance, I'm astounded by and have some limited understanding. That was where I was getting at with my question, that you're uniquely positioned to actually have some point of view on your own grokking of, like, do you think we're moving too fast? I know there's no really slowing it down. What do you do about the fact that we're moving at the speed that we're moving? Um, so I mean, it sort of is what it is, but I'm just sort of curious how you interpret that.
If we knew how to slow it down, a lot of people would probably say, okay, let's, consider doing that. Um, as Mustafa writes in his book, the incentive structures don't really have some mechanism that's all that plausible of how that would happen, given the individual and company and even government level thing. If the government level incentive structure was understood, that alone might be enough. Um, and like the people who say, "Oh, it's fine that it's open source," they're willing to say, "Well, okay, if it gets too good, maybe we'll stop open sourcing it." But will they know what that is? And would they really say, "Okay, maybe the next one"? Um, so you pretty quickly go to, let's not let people with malintent benefit, from having a better AI than, uh, the sort of defense, good intent side of, cyber defense or uh, war defense or bioterror defense. You're not, you're not going to completely put the genie back in the bottle, and yet that means that somebody with negative intent will be empowered in a new way.
So perhaps not a good idea for the most sophisticated AI models to be open source, in your judgment, given this global environment.
Yeah, and people sort of cede that point in principle, but then when you
Yeah.
try to get to say, okay, specifically, where would you apply that? It gets a bit less clear.
I mean, Adam and I were talking yesterday about how even if it were possible, hypothetically, to stop AI development exactly where it is right now, it would probably take 10 years of Forum 3 and other folks helping companies and individuals figure out how to apply the technology that currently exists, right? I mean, we already have an AI that's powerful enough, I think, to have profound implications. It feels like we could easily benefit from 5 to 10 years just thinking of all the useful applications of the level of AI we have today. Do you think so?
I'm less sure about that because, it's pretty clear, I want to make an image. okay, what do I have to learn? I have to learn English. This is the software meeting us, not us meeting the software. So it's not like there's some new menu, file, edit, window, help, and oh, you got to learn that. You have to type the formula into the cell. This is you saying, I wish I could do data analysis to see which of these, products is responsible for the slowdown. And it understands exactly what you're saying. So the idea that there's a impedance of adoption, uh, it's not the normal thing. Yes, company processes that are very used to doing things the old way uh, will have to adjust. But if you look at, you know, telesupport, telesales, uh, data analytics, give somebody a week of watching an advanced user and, say no manual of any kind, just, learn by example of how the stuff is being used. The uptake, assuming there's no limit in terms of the, server capacity that connects these things up, which I don't expect, certainly in rich countries, there'll be a gigantic limitation there. And you're talking about an adoption rate that won't be overnight, but it won't be like, 10 years for us. The number of things, like take human translation. The idea that a free product provides arbitrary audio and text human translation. I mean, that was a holy grail of, oh my God, if you ever had a company that could do that, it would collect, tens of billions in revenue and, solve the Tower of Babel. And here, kind of a small AI company is providing that as an afterthought free feature.
Right.
Totally.
It's pretty wild. And you say, well, how are people going to adapt to free translation? I don't think it's going to take them that long to know, hey, I want to know what that guy was saying. And you can separate the two audio channels with earbuds or something, and there you are. And yes, the quality of that a year from now and the coverage of say all African languages will get completed. The foundation's making sure that even obscure languages that are not written languages, that we're in partnership with others gathering the data for those. The Indian government's doing that for Indian languages. So I don't think saying, hey, calm down, it takes a long time to figure out, how to utter the description of the birthday card you want, and so it'll take, 10 years for the lagging people to switch their behavior.
Well, we see. I think Sam Altman said on your podcast, Unconfuse Me, which I enjoy, that they're seeing a productivity improvement of up to 300%. I think among their developers, and in other sectors, I think we've seen reports of 25-50% increases in productivity. So that just getting that, the great Gibson line, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. It does feel like getting all companies to fully benefit from that level of productivity enhancement, well, it certainly will be a process of some kind. I was interested in your comment in the first chapter of AI First, which is about productivity. You said productivity isn't a mere measure of output per hour. It's about enhancing the quality and creativity of our achievements. What do you mean by that?
Well, whenever you have a productivity increase, you can take your X% increase and increase the quantity of the activity, the quantity of the output. You can improve the quality of the output, or you can reduce the human labor hours that goes in input. And so you always take those three things. There are some things when they get more productive, like when the tire industry went from non-radial tires to radial tires, even though the cost, per year of tire usage went down by a factor of 4, people didn't respond by saying, okay, I'm going to drive 4 times as much. So the demand elasticity for some things like computing or the quality of a news story, there's very high demand elasticity. If you can do a better job, you just leave the human labor hours alone and take most of it in the quality dimension. And then you have a lot of things where that's not the case at all. The appetite, for miles driven, did not change. The society is full of many things that are across that spectrum. And so whenever you have rapid productivity increases, there was a memo inside Microsoft about how we were going to make databases so efficient that it would become a zero-sized market. Now, in that case, we're still in the part of the curve where you have demand elasticity, but someday we'll, even in that domain, we'll get past incremental demand.
Bill, I got one last question I can pop in here. If you were making a guess right now, and you mentioned healthcare and education, how would you respond to the question about, what do you think the first big, I'll call it breakthrough, application will be? Like, for example, like one of the podcasts that Andy and I like to listen to, they were talking this weekend, they keep saying, oh, we haven't seen, the big breakthrough application. And I'm, which is interesting because I'm not sure that's true, but let's just take it on its face value that we're still in this sort of, I'll call it experimentation phase or whatever, which is what they were trying to say. I'd be curious to get what's your thought? Like, where do we see the first big, the Uber, like if like, location services and mobile cloud, the first big app was kind of Uber, and everyone talked about Uber being an example of
I
that.
mean, it was probably before that, it was probably Google Maps, right? It was probably map
Yeah,
technology.
that's right. That's right. So we have, Bill, when you just think out, like, do you go right to education, healthcare? Where does your head go when you think, oh, I'll bet you the first big breakthrough app, consumer app, or even industrial app will be what?
Well, I guess the naysayers are pretty creative to be able to say
Oh, I
that
know.
something gigantic hasn't happened. I mean,
I
Yeah.
agree.
they don't think,
Yeah.
No, yeah,
summarizing meetings or, doing translation or making product programmers more productive. I mean,
That's right.
it's mind blowing. This is white collar capability with a footnote that if in many open-ended scenarios, it's not as reliable as humans are. You can hire humans and they can go haywire, and so you have some monitoring. But that, these things, if put into new territory, are somewhat less predictable. As there's some domains where we can bound what goes on, like support calls or telesales calls, where you're not pushing off the edge at all. So I don't know. I just can't imagine what they're talking about.
Yeah.
That
let me try and I think like, I think the comment when people say that, notwithstanding what you just said, Bill, they're creative in their naysaying capabilities. Because I think that's your response is accurate, for sure. It's like when the car was developed, it's the second order effect. When the car was developed, it could get you from point A to point B, and you might even be able to predict the development of roads and highways, etc. But you might not be able to predict Los Angeles or suburbs, and all drive-in movie theaters. And in the case of, I think in more modern stance, the World Wide Web came along, and there were lots of brochureware, and there was travel agent Expedia came along, and that was all sort of like run-of-the-mill first order effect. But people point at Uber as a second order effect on the technology that sort of was like, oh, you couldn't have predicted that. Now, maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, but I think that's what Adam's question, I think, is going for. When you look at AI, I mean, in many ways, the game of search has already changed, which is ubiquitous um, um, uh, consumer activity. And certainly ChatGPT was a monumental, the fastest growing technology, adopted technology in our ever. So I'm not minimizing or giving credence to the naysayers, but it's really about the second order effects.
Now ChatGPT 3 was not that interesting. I mean, it was interesting enough that a few people at OpenAI felt the scaling effect would cross a threshold. And I didn't predict that, and very few people did. And we only crossed that threshold less than 2 years ago, a year and a half in terms of general availability. So we are very much in the people who are open-minded and are willing to try out new things are the ones using it. But you just demo, okay, here's image editing. And no, I'm not teaching you 59 menus and dialogues in Photoshop to do editing. I'm telling you, type, get rid of that green sweater. And people are like, oh, I don't know if I could do that. I mean, that sounds very hard to me.
Right.
And when you show people that, it's like, what? Make that photo bigger.
Yeah.
I didn't take a shot that was bigger, but I'd like the photo to be bigger. So fill in the missing piece to make it bigger. And it's like, what? Or patient follow-up, where it calls you up and talks to you about, did you fulfill your prescription? How are you feeling? What are you doing? I mean, uh, people may get saturated if they really try and expose themselves to the various examples. I do think they'd be saturated with, oh my God, this is, a lot of extremely concrete capability. And, then you think, okay, when I call up to ask about my taxes, when I want my medical bill explained, that, white collar worker uh, is almost free type mentality is the best way to kind of predict what this thing suffuses to, even though I fully admit there's a footnote there that it's in some ways still a little bit of a crazy white collar worker. But that we're going to get rid of that footnote
Yeah.
over a period of years.
I know one of those crazy white collar workers who's a CEO of a company that's growing very quickly, who asked his top salespeople, what takes you the most time during this day? And they said, drafting follow-up emails following sales calls. And he created an instance of GPT to, pulled in all their best practices, best communications, automatically transcribes every phone call and automatically generates the follow-up email. And he's laying off half of his sales team so that the best half of his sales team can work, because they can now work twice as efficiently. So there we have both a success story in the sense that it's a highly efficient and wildly impressive implementation of the technology. But for the other half of the sales team, it's not quite as exciting unless they can use new AI technologies to build a competing company or to do something else, which I guess, gets to this broader question of like, to what extent do we think this empowers the little guy versus the big guy? I mean, we're seeing that there are just a few big companies seem to be the dominant players in the development of the technology. But on the other hand, it does seem that everyone has access to GPT-4 Omni at now for free. So there's also an equalizing element.
Well, it's important to distinguish two parts of economic activity. One is the economic activity building AI products, and both base level AI products and then vertical AI products. And we can say for sure that the barriers to entry are uniquely low, in that we're in this mania period where, somebody literally raised $6 billion in cash, for a company, and many others raised hundreds of millions. And, so the idea that there's never been as much capital going into a new category. You could even say a new mania category. I mean, this makes the internet or the early auto industry mania look, quite small in terms of the percentage of IQ and the valuations, that come out of this. I mean, there was no company before the turn of the century that had ever been worth $1 trillion. Here we have one chip company who doesn't make chips. It's a chip design company
Right.
that in 6 months adds $1 trillion of value. You know that, and so the dynamics within the AI space is both hyper competitive, but with lots of entry. And yes, Google and Microsoft have the most capital, but that's not really
No.
stopping people either in the base capabilities or in those verticals. Once you leave the AI tools domain, which, as big as it is a modest part of the global economy, how that gets applied to, okay, I'm a small hospital chain versus a big hospital chain. Now when I have these tools, does that, level the playing field or not? You would hope that it would, and that you can offer it for the same price or less, a far better level of service. All of these things are in the furtherance of getting the value down to the customer, and figuring out early in an industry where the barriers are so that some of the improvements stick with companies versus perfect competition where it all goes to the end users. That's very hard, to think through. Like picks and shovels is saying, okay, look to the side industries, as well as to the primary industry. Savings and loans did better than home builders because there was a more scarce capability there that, a few did better than others. So it's asking a lot, but it is, people are being forced to think about the competitive dynamics in these other businesses. When you free up labor, that labor society is essentially richer. That, through your tax system, you can take that labor and put it into, smaller class size or helping the elderly better, and you're net better off. Now, for the person involved, they may like that transition or not, and it requires some political capacity to do that redirection. And you can, have a view of our current trust in our political capacity to reach consensus and, create effective programs. But, it's the frontier of possibilities is improved by increased productivity. You'd never want to run the clock backwards and say, thank God we were less productive, 20 years ago.
Do you think that we were talking earlier about the impossibility of slowing down or the great difficulty of slowing down the current pace of AI development? Do you think AI companies should be governed? And if so, by whom? By boards, by government, by all of the above?
Well, government is the only place where the overall well-being of society as a whole, including against attack and, a judicial system that's fair and, creating educational opportunities. So you can't expect the private sector to walk away from market-driven opportunity unless the government decides what the rules are. So this is, although the private sector should help educate government, work with government, the governments will have to play a big role here. And, so that's a dialogue that people are investing in. Now, governments will take the things that are most concrete, like what are the copyright rules or what are the abuses of deep fakes, or, in some applications, does the unreliability, say, of health diagnosis or hiring decisions mean that you ought to move more slowly or create some liability for those things. They'll tend to focus in on those short-term issues, which, that's fine. But, the biggest issue has to do with the adjustments to productivity that overall, should be a phenomenal opportunity if political capacity and the speed which it was coming were paired very well.
Our environment of polarization doesn't help the the effectiveness of our government. And I think you mentioned on your podcast that in a worst case scenario, we could imagine polarization, breaking our democracy. Do you think AI can help us all get along? And if so, how would it do that?
Well, it's such a powerful tool that at least we ought to consider for all our tough problems where it can be beneficial or where it can exacerbate things. So certainly if somebody wants to understand, okay, where did this come from, this article or this video, what is the provenance? Is that provably a reliable source? Or is this information accurate? Or, in general, in my news feed, what am I seeing that, somebody who's voting for the other side, what are they seeing? And, try to explain to me what has pushed them in that direction. You'd hope that, sort of again, going back to the paradigm of white collar capability being almost free, that well-intended people who want to bridge those misunderstandings would have the tools of AI to highlight misinformation for them or highlight bias for them or help them be in the mindset and understand, okay, how do we bridge the different views of the world that we have. So yes, although it sounds outlandish, it's like, when people say, oh, let's use geoengineering for climate, they're like, oh no, you always think, technology might be the answer. And,
Yeah.
I'm somewhat guilty of that. But here, the AIs are going to be both part of the solution, while if we're not careful, also potentially exacerbating these things. And you can almost say it's good that the blue collar job substitution stuff is more delayed than the white collar
Yeah.
stuff, so that
Right.
it's not
Right.
just any one sector, and actually it's the more educated sector that's seen
Right.
these changes first.
I hadn't thought of that. Okay, last question. You've said that a possible future problem that befuddles you is how to think about our purpose as humans in a world in which machines can solve problems better than we can. Is this a nagging concern that you continue to wrestle with? How do you think about it now?
Well, I don't think somebody who spent 68 years in a world of shortage, and okay, we use market mechanisms to deal with the shortage. We use various incentive structures to innovate, to create more supply capacity. I doubt that either at that absolute age or having been immersed in such an utterly different environment, that the ability to imagine, this post shortage type world will come from anyone near my age. So,
Right. Right.
I view it as a very important problem that people should contemplate. But no, that's not one that I have the solution or would expect to have.
Although you have some experience with living in a post-scarcity world in the sense that you haven't had scarcity in your own personal life for a few years now.
I haven't had
Is that-
financial scarcity, but
Yeah.
somebody who's had the enjoyment of being successful and sees problems out there like malaria or polio or measles, the satisfaction that, okay, the number of people who work on this, the amount of research money for this is very, very scarce. And so I
Yeah.
feel a unique value added in taking my own resources and working with governments to orchestrate, okay, let's not have any kids die of malaria. Let's not have any kids die of measles. So you're right financially that, you know, what I do for fun, you know, is a potential kind of thing that people can do, you know, play pickleball, because the fact the machines will be good at pickleball, you know, that won't bother us. We'll, you know, still
Yeah.
enjoy that as a human thing. But you know, the satisfaction of helping out reduce scarcity, um, you know, that which
Yeah.
is the thing that motivates me, that also goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. So the true last question, rumor has it you're working on a memoir. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, we announced that in next February, sort of a first volume that covers my life up till the first 2 or 3 years of Microsoft, about age 25 or so, called Source Code, will come out. So I'm working on editing that right now, since we're about to hit deadlines. But yeah, we got a good reception to the pre-announcement of that first volume.
Is GPT helping you out with that?
Actually, no. You know, not because I'm against it or anything. I suppose in the end maybe we should, but no, it's still we're being a little traditional in terms of how we're both writing and editing.
Will there be 2 volumes or 3 volumes, do you think?
3. So
Okay.
they're, you know, we'll probably wait 3 years before we do a second one, but you know, there's kind of a period that's Microsoft oriented and a period that's, you know, sort of giving all the money away focused.
Well, if you and Andy play enough pickleball, maybe you'll live long enough to write a fourth volume.
That's true.
We hope so.
You know, making AI good will make that the fourth volume.